actions betray his sinister vision.
Knows that he stands with some saying probably won't and marches in the streets. We'll have the latest word that there is a bipartisan casualties, the latest figures, all what's doing and now, post-presidential speech on Money Watch. And AccuWeather says cloudy, brisk, and cold with a chance for snow later and a high of 37 today. Winds news time 3:01. And from your traffic center, here is Greg Rice.
We've been dealing with this trouble on the Turnpike for almost an hour now. Northbound New Jersey Turnpike, the truck lanes near the Goethals. You got a wreck knocking out a couple of lanes, so everything, car and truck lanes, get bad out of Carteret on up. Car lanes, the lesser of two evils. The northbound side of 1 and 9. If you can swing that out of Woodbridge up through Linden towards the Goethals, going to treat you better than the Turnpike at this hour. If you're looking about the Garden State Parkway, northbound side going to load up out of Cranford towards Union. But until then, you're fine. Here's what you need to know about the bridges and tunnels. Citybound George, upper levels better than the lower. Looks like they're starting to wrap up midday work on the lower deck. Nothing great getting out of town at the George. Not with the west side starting to load up through the 120s at this point. Lincoln, it's about 10 minutes either way. Holland Tunnel right now still closer to 20 to 30 out from Barrack. Inbound, no more than about 10 to 15 minutes. The Citybound Midtown Tunnel, the Citybound Williamsburg, the Brooklyn-bound Brooklyn Bridge, all loaded up. Traffic. Jackpocket games on your phone. Use code RADIO for a free Mega Millions or Powerball ticket. Must be 18 or older to play. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. Please visit jackpocket.com/TOS for full terms of service. I'm Greg Rice on 1010 Wins.
Breaking news now on 1010 Wins. President Biden speaking to the nation this afternoon with what he called the toughest sanctions ever for Russia and Vladimir Putin for exacting its toll on Ukraine. The president calling this Putin's war.
At the very moment that the United Nations Security Council was meeting to stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty, to stave off invasion, Putin declared his war. Within moments, missile strikes began to fall on historic cities across Ukraine. Then came the air raids, followed by tanks and troops rolling in.
The president says the U.S. and its allies combined will hit Russia where it hurts the most, in the pocket.
The Russian stock market plunged today. The Russian government's borrowing rate spiked by over 15%. Today's actions, we've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself. Cut it off from the U.S. financial system.
But the big question, of course, will that stop him? And it hasn't yet. And with the cost of gasoline going up here and around the world, all caused in part by this crisis, the president says part of his mission today is also making sure his administration does all it can to take the sting off the gas pump.
We are actively working with countries around the world to elevate collective release from the strategic petroleum reserves of major energy-consuming countries. And the United States will release additional barrels of oil as conditions warrant. I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump.
Meantime, reaction is pouring in from all corners of the globe, with condemnation coming from France and the UK. At a news conference today, Ukrainian Ambassador Oksana Markarova says Putin has been lying from the start, telling the West that he was not planning for a war, all the while sharpening his targets.
Make no mistake, it's not a military operation or whatever it was called yesterday in Donetsk or Lugansk. It's a war against Ukraine.
And yes, world leaders all over are expressing raw outrage, but tapping the brakes on any suggestion that anyone is going to physically jump in the fray, with a military existence, that is, setting off a major war in Europe. So far, the biggest weapon from all corners of the globe appear to be economic blows to Russia, hoping that it will cripple the economy and Putin so bad that he can't carry out his perceived goal of reshaping what would appear to be the old Soviet Union. New York Ukrainian sought spiritual guidance at the St. George Ukrainian Catholic Church in the East Village. Newsman Roger Stern was there for that.
They came here for support and to pray. Natalia, though, finding it hard to follow certain church teachings.
I'm a religious person. This place, I have been taught for more than 4 years to love my enemy. But it's so hard to apply this teaching today.
She's talking about Vladimir Putin. There's this woman who didn't want to give us her name because she has family back home.
They're frightened. We're frightened for them. We don't know what's going to happen next.
And whatever happens next, many here are predicting a tremendous loss of life. Roger Stern, 1010 Williams in the East Village.
Outrage spilled onto the streets of New York this afternoon with hundreds of protesters in Times Square and now marching through Midtown chanting "Hands off Ukraine." And then on the streets of Ukraine, Piccadilly neighborhood, people are lining up at banks and stores trying to gather supplies, albeit last minute, trying to get out of town and away from danger. The shelling continues. Many analysts say this could be just the beginning, suggesting Putin may eventually try to overtake entire Ukraine. Back in our state, New York Governor Kathy Hochul offering her support for the Ukrainian people.
We have in New York State one of the largest Ukrainian populations outside the country, and we're proud of this. We're proud of their diversity and what they bring to all of us, but now they have family members and are deeply concerned about what's going on in their home countries.
And in Congress, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle lining up in lockstep with the president in condemning Putin's actions. Also, British leaders hitting Russia with the largest and most ever package of sanctions as well. Punishment for the Ukraine. Correspondent Tom Rivers is in London for us.
British Prime Minister addressing Parliament said, despite weeks of talking and shuttle diplomacy,
I'm driven to conclude that Putin was always determined to attack his neighbor, no matter what we did.
And in describing the Russian leader, Boris Johnson didn't mince his words.
A blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest.
Hard to see right now how these tattered relations can ever be fully mended. Tom Rivers, ABC News, London.
A quick check of the weather here. That's the other big story that we would otherwise be following. A wintry mix of snow, sleet, and rain will begin this evening. The city and coastal suburbs should go over plain rain by daybreak at least. Get a coating to an inch of sleet, though, before the changeover with some slippery roads. Otherwise, sleet and snow will continue overnight across the inland suburbs with slow and very slippery travel totals of 1 to 3 inches. And then temperatures tonight slowly rising to 34 in the city, but staying below freezing to the north and west of here. We're at 32 degrees right now in Central Park. Wednesday news time 3:08. Sadly enough, the International Red Cross has warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could lead to massive casualties. Correspondent Elaine Cobb with more.
As Russia continued to hit targets in Ukraine today, the International Red Cross says it's concerned there could be a frightening number of casualties. ICRC President Peter Maurer warns that civilian life could become very difficult if facilities such as water and electricity plants were to be hit. And as Ukrainians flee major cities, the ICRC says waves of internally displaced people can be expected. Elaine Cobb, CBS News.
And as of this writing, we're hearing that at least 40 lives have been lost in the wake of this crisis. And our coverage will continue in just a moment. Wednesday news time 3:09.
Hey team, it's a full house. We gotta pick up the pace.
At Hank's Restaurant, the line goes around the block.
This for 12? Okay, I need the truffle oil drizzle.
What he needs is another line cook.
Oh man, are the quail breasts still in the sous vide? Dave, can you keep an eye on that, please?
Indeed can help him hire great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. InstaMatch instantly connects you with quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your sponsored job description. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
You are an electric vehicle. It's true. Electricity powers your heart. Want to feel your heartbeat faster? Drive an electric car. Made by Nissan, a company whose EVs have gone 5 billion miles. Built for every driveway, every highway, and every speedway. And where the loudest sound is the beat of your electric heart. Nissan. Electric cars for electric drivers. 5 billion miles driven by leaf owners globally since 2010.
Now this message, Samuel D. Flatt, Social Security Disability Attorney, 718-544-2767. Wednesday news time 3:10. Traffic and AccuWeather coming up.
At Fisher Investments, our clients know we have their backs.
How do your clients know that?
Because Fisher Investments is a fiduciary, the highest standard for a financial advisor.
Playground. She told me that, she was pretty scared, she said, but she was trying to put on a brave face because she didn't want her children to be worried. She'd already had to flee the fighting once. She fled in 2014 from a town called Avdiivka, which is right on the front line, because her daughter became too scared to go out of the house. And so now, 8 years later, she's facing the prospect of being uprooted again, which is something that she really, still now, I think, she can't conceive actually having to do. So she's still living in this kind of suspended reality, seeing the war begins. escalate in front of her, and yet still clinging to the hope that she could stay in her home and not be uprooted again.
BBC Sarah Rainsford in eastern Ukraine. Let's head to the capital now, which is where our correspondent Paul Adams is. Paul, what's the day been like for you?
Long and confusing, I think, Tim. We were awoken at 5 o'clock in the morning by the sound of muffled explosions. We really haven't heard, it's a bit like Sarah, we really haven't heard very much of that since. I mean, there have been these odd moments, like a moment when 2 jets came flying overhead, and we weren't sure if they were Russian or Ukrainian. We also, a colleague of mine just said she heard a rumble of something just a few moments ago. One thing that's worth bearing in mind about the situation near Kiev is that probably around 25 kilometers from here to the northwest, we know that Russian paratroopers are ensconced at an airbase, an airport. Since before light this morning, they were dropped there as part of the first wave of this attack, and they are well established. They've been seen by other journalists. There has been, I think, at one point during the day, an attempt by the Ukrainians to throw them out of that location, but I don't think that has succeeded. And the question is what they're there for. Are they there waiting for the arrival of Russian armor, which is coming down from the north, or possibly as a kind of springboard for operations in the capital?
And presumably, I mean, there must be trepidation in the capital that it could yet see much greater military action.
There's real trepidation. I went outside just for some fresh air and by the way, a curfew has just come into force about 10 minutes ago. I went outside, I was just breathing the air. And I was told by a couple of gentlemen I bumped into that there were documents being burned in a nearby government building, and some soldiers came by and they were looking for someone who might have a drone. A real sense of sort of nervousness and tension in the air, because there is this understanding, this belief that Russian special forces and Secret Service agents have been here in Kiev probably for quite some time, getting ready for just this moment.
Paul Adams in Kiev, thank you very much. Well, let's speak to a member of Parliament, of the Ukrainian Parliament. He's with President Volodymyr Zelensky's Servant of the People Party, Sviatoslav Jurash. Sviatoslav, I think, am I right in saying that you are still in Kiev, in the capital Kiev?
Apologies. Yes, I'm in Government District, exactly where your correspondent was reporting about the situation, and where we should would expect most action tomorrow if all goes as Russia's planned, although it doesn't seem to, because the battles for Hostomel, because it's not just an airport, it's the biggest army airport that Ukraine has, and the big transport planes can land there, so obviously the fear is that Russians can land more forces there and try to move on Kiev.
Right, but I mean, you're presumably, whatever the timing of this is, you presumably are under no illusion that what Russia wants now is regime change, and that it will get people such as you, in one way or the other, out of the way.
Russia wants to take Ukraine, not just regime change. Putin is very clear that he wants to consume Ukraine whole. He has made an hour-long speech just to that effect, and his policies over the years and his statements over the years is very much in that regard. So the point here is not to be forgotten that Putin wants to destroy the biggest state in Europe, annex it in different ways, but still annex it.
But given that Western intelligence has been pretty accurate up to now in terms of predicting what Russian actions will be, Western intelligence has also been pretty cold in its appraisal of the Kremlin's plan to kill or detain prominent Ukrainians. And I just wonder whether you are personally concerned that you may be a target.
for that exact reason, I today went to the cruising station in Kiev, and they are full. There are huge queues of people getting ready for battle, and there are people that essentially are staying and fighting for our capital. I'm staying as well. I was a part today of the effort to get weapons into the hands of those who want to try and defend Ukraine in the capital in any way possible. I now am at home because of the curfew and with my AK-47, and although I'm not much of a soldier, I will do everything possible to try and defend our capital.
It's going to be, if it comes to that, an unequal fight, given the might of Russian military. I know that you and others say that what binds you is the desire to resist and a sense of patriotism, but how far do you accept that ultimately, if Russia does want to conquer Ukraine, it will?
We don't accept that. Our history is a guide to that. We lived through much worse in the 20th century. I still remember my great-grandmother who was telling me of the genocide by hunger, Holodomor. I remember the stories of my grandfather, the Second World War. We basically, all Ukrainians have those traumas that stain our history on us. And if we emerge from the perilous 20th century with a state of 50 million people, then our job right now is to keep it and to honor the sacrifice of the previous generations in trying to defend that state at the very least.
What do you want from the West?
Everything. Nothing is enough, as you can say, because Russia has shown itself to be not just a violator, but a destroyer of any kind of pretense in the national world order. So the point here is no sanctions are enough, and no kind of support is enough. Ukraine needs everything at the moment, and we very much welcome all the steps that UK has been making and clear statements by the Prime Minister in that regard. And we very much see as disgusting what we see today in the European discussion about, for example, switching Russia off from SWIFT systems, where Germany and a number of other countries have declined to support the motion to shut Russia off from international banking systems, because Russia, again, has done everything possible, both before this and now, to try and show itself to be a country that doesn't want to be a part of the world community.
Sviatoslav, just very briefly, we're about to speak to a U.S. congressman on the program. What message would you have for him?
Again, always welcome. We've seen steps taken. I've heard plenty of discussion on various foreign affairs circles in the West about need for more steps to be taken by Biden. We very much welcome that, and we very much see as a wonderful result the bipartisan consensus in Congress in support of Ukraine.
Okay, Sviatoslav Jurash, thank you very much for joining us. We hope to be able to speak to you in the days to come. That was the Ukrainian Member of Parliament. He's with President Zelensky's servant of the People Party.
Someone wants to know, are you an influencer? A big live streamer? No? Then guess what? You don't need an endless data plan. Get just the right amount of data with TracFone's $40 unlimited talk and text smartphone plan. Now with 8 gigs of high-speed data in unlimited carryover on America's largest, most dependable network, now with 5G. Get the data you need at the price you want. TracFone Wireless. Now you're in control. Available at major retailers. 5G compatible device required. Actual availability, coverage, and speed may vary. See terms and conditions at TracFone.com.
You're always up for some fun with the family, so you order the essentials: a new board game, some baking supplies, and even a new projector for outdoor movie night. And with the Bank of America customized Cash Rewards credit card, you can choose to earn 3% cash back on online shopping, which could increase to up to 5.25% as a preferred rewards member. Rewards which you can put toward an extra treat that everyone will enjoy, like an old-fashioned popcorn machine. Visit bankofamerica.com/more rewarding and apply now. Copyright 2021 Bank of America Corporation.
The only thing better than Paul McCartney in concert is Paul McCartney in concert with you. In the audience, of course. Listen all this week between 10 and 12 for your chance to win a pair of tickets from your favorite all-new station, 1010 Wins.
All news, all the time. This is 1010 Wins. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world.
33 degrees and cloudy skies at 3:20. I'm Larry Mullins, and here's what's happening this afternoon. More out of Washington as President Biden addresses the nation on Russia's invasion of Ukraine amidst concerns that this is just the tip of the iceberg for Vladimir Putin. Mr. Biden vowing that he'll certainly pay for it in the way of sanctions. NATO taking action, condemning the invasion. We're also hearing of a UN Security Council vote tomorrow to condemn the invasion, although Russia expected to turn up its nose despite the heavy dose of sanctions headed its way. And as the tanks and missiles rain on Ukraine, we'll hear anonymously from a Russian citizen who says many people there don't support that invasion and that anything to the contrary was staged by the Putin government. And as President Biden mentioned, the impact could be felt on Americans at the gas pump, where a barrel of oil topped 100 at one point today. Analysts saying what's more, it could mean upwards of a $4 a gallon gas tank by Memorial Day. Actor Sean Penn in Ukraine today filming will tell you why in 1010 Wins Entertainment. Stocks took another hit today in the wake of the crisis. We'll see how they end up as we approach the closing bell on Money Watch. And AccuWeather says cloudy, brisk, and cold with a chance for snow later on and a high of 37 by day. Wins News Time 321. And from your traffic center, here again is Greg Rice.
Now, right to what you need to know about the bridges and tunnels. The outbound of Holland tunnel, you got the right lane out with a stall until they fish that out. It's going to get worse, 30 plus right now at the outbound of Holland. Inbound side of the Holland right now, it's about 10 minutes from anything. Lincoln tunnel looks okay, no more than 15 on the outbound ride or 5 to 10 in. Citybound side of the George, better to the upper and lower, just nothing easy out. Northbound west side and southbound Deegan are bad, so that's everything. Eastern spur of the New Jersey Turnpike, you got a southbound standstill after the Vince Lombardi. Southbound the western spur, for all of its faults, it's better. Looks like the earlier...
said and done by their elected leaders. This appears to be very much the case when it comes to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Polina is a student and activist who asked that we not use her whole name and has protested in several Russian cities. She says people do not support the invasion.
Of course, we do not support it.
Polina is afraid of being detained, like hundreds of anti-war protesters in Russia already have been, because if that happens, one can be held for a long time.
Getting detained for a long period of time.
She says any pro-invasion rallies in Russia were staged by authorities there.
A senior U.S. defense official telling the AP that the attack appears to be the first phase in what will likely be a multiple-phase, large-scale invasion. On Russian TV today, Putin again defending the attack as a necessary measure, accusing Ukraine of creating such great risks in the security sphere that it was impossible to react with any other means.
3,000 down 0.5%, 169 points. Even touches
change. These are the men and women of the black community making a difference.
We've seen hard before, trauma in ways that we
colleague that we will support and defend Article 5 of the NATO treaty. And we see that with the movement. I mean, we've got 90,000 Americans in multiple countries throughout Europe. Our commitment is very strong and clear, and the President has reiterated that on more than one occasion.
Can I ask you, given that you sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and Ukraine may well be top of that the list of priorities right now, but how far you think American action over Ukraine will be important to Chinese calculations over Taiwan?
I think it's important. And I think that there is a conversation going on in the House Foreign Relations Committee, as well as with my colleagues in the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue. So the marriage of convenience we see today between Russia and China, I think is just that. It's a marriage of convenience. While there are some concerns, and I share them, about what lessons China may take from this, the fact is that taking Taiwan and the efforts that would take is far different than this stalemate of a conflict. As you noted, it's been going on since 2014 in Ukraine. And by the way, when you look at Georgia and you look at No, I just want to close here. I think there's lessons to learn by the lack of action in 2014 with Russia's advance toward Crimea as well as Jordan.
Congressman Castro, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsHour. The distribution of the BBC NewsHour in the U.S. is supported by Angie, dedicated to helping homeowners tackle projects from everyday repairs to dream remodels. Reviews, upfront pricing for hundreds of projects, and instant booking found at Angie.com or on the Angie app. And Aspiration, focused on combating climate change with the Aspiration credit card that helps members go carbon neutral. One card, zero carbon footprint. More at aspiration.com/credit. Aspiration Financial, LLC.
Stay with WNYC. Our special coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues from the BBC, and it continues at 4 on NPR's All Things Considered. And if you're looking for the takeaway, you can catch up on today's show with their podcast or listen now at WNYC. Listen to
Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, as Moscow's multi-pronged invasion progresses. Ukraine many casualties across the country. Reports suggest Russian armored columns have made rapid progress south from Belarus and north from the Crimean Peninsula. Further sanctions on Russia, which he said would impose severe and long-term costs.
It will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that. Putin will be a pariah on the international stage. Any nation that counters Russia's naked aggression against Ukraine will be stained by association.
In a televised address, Mr. Biden said Vladimir Putin had launched an assault on the very principles that upheld global peace in an attempt to re-establish the Soviet Union. He said there would be strict new limits on exports to Russia, and G7 countries had agreed to stop Russian businesses from conducting trade in major foreign currencies. EU leaders are holding an emergency summit in Brussels, where they're reported to have agreed a raft of tougher new sanctions against Russia. Britain said Russian banks would be excluded from London's financial system. There's been a surge in anti-war rallies in dozens of cities. BBC News.
Welcome back to News Hour. With war comes economic convulsion, and today European gas prices surged by a third. Europe, after all, relies on Russia for nearly 40% of its gas and oil imports. At the same time, stock markets fell. The ruble collapsed at one point to an all-time low against the dollar. Ed Moyer is the senior market analyst with Oanda. It's a global currency exchange trading corporation. Ed, I want to get onto the global ramifications in a moment, but just first, in terms of the Russian economy, that we've heard announced.
Was going to be taken by the G7, and right now you're probably going to see that there is going to be further market pain. The Russian stock market lost over 200 billion, and you're going to see that they expecting that this is going to be the path that the U.S. and Europeans are going to be taking, and there's probably going to be accelerated actions taken throughout the coming weeks and months. But I think that right now this is going to really Russian market.
We're aware of Russian oil and gas exports, but it's not just that, is it? I mean, they export other commodities as well. How potentially, how much of a hit could this be to Western economies that are already dealing with inflation?
This is going to be very important to focus on, because I think that what a lot of traders are extremely nervous about is that there's so many commodities and different goods that come out of both Russia and the Ukraine, and that this is really going to intensify a lot of supply chain issues, and you're going to see that it's just going to lead to greater inflation globally, and that's going to really complicate central bank action. And you're probably going to see that some supplies like Russia and Ukraine, they make 90% of neon, and that is heavily used in the chip sector. So you're going to probably see that this is not going to ease up anytime soon.
And just briefly, I mean, I mentioned the West. There are, of course, developing countries that import a lot of wheat from Russia and Ukraine, presumably possible pain for them.
Exactly, and I think that growth when they were supposed to see significant rebounds while their governments are really trying to rein in debt.
This is News live from the BBC World Service in London with me, Tim Franks. We've heard something of the shock and promise of defiance in Ukraine. You'll hear more of that in about 15 minutes when I speak to a 19-year-old student in Kiev who says she's willing to be part of any insurgency. What's the reaction in Russia? The BBC's Sergei Goryashko is in our Moscow bureau. Sergei, first off, I mean, just give me a sense of both what's the way in which this is being sort of portrayed in Russian media, but
also Russian state TV channels, Russian state media, and Russian social media. On the state, they still are showing Putin's address, which has an operation as the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, told, to prevent a global war, and Russia is putting an end to a war in the Ukraine, which is could be arguably true, as we're getting rocket missiles falling down just near the Ukrainian cities. And as per social media, I've never seen such a big shout to come, because they were talks about the probability of an invasion of Russian troops in the Ukraine, but only in those so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, which were recognized as independent states by Moscow early this week. But nobody has expected that Russia would conduct a full-scale military operation and volunteer.
Despite all that the president and his lieutenants have said about Ukraine, about it being this renegade regime, about it, the need for it to be denazified, in their words, demilitarized, people are still shocked that this is an all-out invasion.
Yeah, they are. And even those who were supporting Putin, I've talked to some of those just on the streets of Moscow earlier this day. They told me that they are frightened and they have never expected this to happen. War scares everyone here. But even though they support Putin's course and they support his actions, they are shocked that Russia has started this war, and they are afraid of what could happen to the country, to the neighboring country. Many people in Russia have their friends and relatives in Ukraine, and the cultural and personal ties to this country are still quite great, even though for 30 years they are parts, like they are not in the same country like they were before in the USSR. Still, it's a very important country for Russians, and even though for the last 8 years the relationship between those two was souring, people are still quite alright both in Ukraine and Russia to talk to each other if they are friends and relatives, and now everyone just is trying to calculate the probable consequences of those steps being made, both in personal way, in economic way, and in all other means.
Sergei Goryashko in our Moscow bureau, thank you very much for joining us late in the evening, Russia time. Vladimir Putin told a televised meeting of business leaders today that there was no other way for him to defend Russia other than to have this invasion of Ukraine, to which the obvious question is, really? Earlier, my colleague James Menendez spoke to Vitaly Milanov. He's an MP from the governing United Russia Party, and he asked him, why had Russia taken this cataclysmic decision?
For many years, you've been trying to use this poor territory with a weak state as anti-Russian force, and now it's a small payback time. It's like a reasonable reaction towards the aggression. So-called Ukrainian military forces, these people being used by you, Europeans. You did it, actually.
Well, I don't understand why. Ukraine is a sovereign country, and it has a right to self-determination, and it's made its choice to become a democratic country that looks to Europe and the West for support.
You used to call Ukraine as a sovereign country only when it's important to call them sovereign.
But you're making it sound like it's a sort of puppet government of the European Union, when in fact what it looks like is about to happen is that Russia wants to create a puppet government in Ukraine.
Yeah, we felt ourselves quite comfortable with Ukraine as a sovereign state, being a peaceful neighbor of Russian Federation for many years. Right after your best started to make politics there from the so-called revolution in Ukraine, right after your unsuccessful attempt to make your puppy state in 2014, they became a country with a very aggressive position.
Are you saying that this is all Europe and Washington's fault?
Of course. You use this country for your own personal political needs to act against Russia. Haven't you foreseen this situation, that if you're trying to push Russian bear for 8 years, sometimes it can happen vice versa?
You're making it sound like Russia is the victim in all this, but it's Russia that's launched this military action. No one else has.
Russia is sending pages of peace over Ukraine, because I think that most of Ukrainians are dreaming to kick out Zelensky and all your advisors sent by UK and European Union and United States.
People voted for President Zelensky. Isn't that what Russia really hates? The fact that Ukraine is a democracy and it's decided not to throw in its lot with Russia, but actually with the West.
People in Donbass and Lugansk, they have voted officially by absolute majority to go out of Ukraine. Why don't you give them a chance to go out of this country?
That is disputed, though. I just need to ask you this, Mr. Milanov. Is that the aim? Is it simply to absorb the Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk into Russia, or is this a full-scale occupation of Ukraine?
Look, you have to send your reporters to the region. They will send you the right figures with the people, with the flowers, welcoming the liberators from the Ukrainian Nazi regime. And I'm absolutely sure that what Putin is doing right now is a very necessary and important job to clean Nazi, even feeded by European Union and Americans, out from Europe. So you have to make Putin the most honorable man in the world.
The Russian MP Vitaly Milanov speaking to my colleague James Menendez. There were some anti-war protests today in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Hundreds were detained in pretty short order by the police. But while we know the space for dissent has shrunk in recent years in Russia, there is still, it seems, some space for skepticism, at least among foreign policy analysts, including those who are plugged into Russian government circles. Sergei Utkin is head of strategic assessment section at the Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations as part of the Russian Academy of Sciences. It may not be surprising what has happened in Ukraine. Is it still shocking?
Well, I think shocked is a correct description for many, and I also see many of my colleagues reacting in this way. I think all those weeks-long speculations about possible large-scale war were met by many, including among experts on international relations in Russia and abroad, with quite some skepticism. So people thought that this is some political messaging that happens between the West and Russia, and that is because a true wide-scale military campaign, the like of what we are witnessing today, is inevitably something that hurts Russia as well, not just Ukraine. And this is both because of sanctions and because of the devastating impact on any possible future relationship between not just Russia and Ukraine as countries, but also the two peoples that are united by multiple ties on family level and on every other level.
You will, of course, be familiar with the argument that is used by the Kremlin, by Mr. Putin, and by his supporters in the Duma, which is that this is a war of necessity because of the threat that they feel that Ukraine poses. You're saying that you and your colleagues who are involved in policy analysis and think tanks, that is a line of argument that you do not subscribe to?
Well, of course, you have different people also among policy analysts. You have those who buy into this official line. I cannot subscribe to it, and I think for every war that you can think of, you have some kind of justification that people propose, but then the question is it really inevitable? Is it the only solution? And my answer, it is neither the only solution nor the solution at all, because the problems that existed between Russia and Ukraine or between Russia and the West, they will just be multiplied by these horrible developments.
No one obviously wants there to be war because of all the suffering that goes with that. But in terms of the cold appraisal of a Russian military victory and also the economic cost, I mean, there are those who say, look, obviously the Russian military is vastly more powerful than the Ukrainian military. So if it wants to win this war, it will. And in terms of the potential damage to the Russian economy, you talked about the sanctions. Again, you hear the argument, well, the Russian economy is pretty well insulated against sanctions from the West, certainly much more so than it was several years ago. Why, in that case, do you think that there could be such damage to Russia?
Of course, people who deal with Russian economy, they were preparing for impact of various sanctions for a long time, but you cannot really insulate your economy in today's world. You always can connected to other countries, to producers of all the high-tech stuff, to financial mechanisms that are inevitably global, and all that has impact on the rate of ruble, on the wealth of families, on the accessibility of some basic stuff that people already started to take for granted, like all sorts of goods in shops and everything. So even on this everyday level, you will probably have an impact, at least in terms of less money in the pockets. But also in more general terms, think of the Russian big business, of those companies that have global international ambitions. They will be restrained in their activities. So basically, it's about making a choice whether you prioritize economic growth or you prioritize something completely different. And it looks like the choice is currently made in favor of the latter.
Sergei Utkin, senior policy analyst at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. This is NewsHour. Distribution of the BBC NewsHour in the U.S. is supported by Progressive Insurance with the Name Your Price tool, offering a range of coverage and price options to choose from. Now that's Progressive. More at Progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. And by Indeed, inviting you to join the over 3 million businesses that use Indeed.com for hiring. You can post a job in minutes and manage your candidates from an easy-to-use dashboard. We invite you to post your next job on Indeed.com.
This is WNYC. Special coverage from the BBC of Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues at 4. Stay for more on All Things Considered. And if you're looking for the takeaway, you can catch up on today's show via their podcast or listen now at WNYC.org.
Black history is American history. WNYC spotlights the African American experience with special programs, including a celebration of writer and activist Toni Morrison, and WNYC's MLK, Activism and the Arts, focusing on the role of artists in the civil rights movement then and now. Tune in all this week at 8 p.m. on 93.9 FM, AM 820, or live streaming at WNYC.org.
Support for WNYC comes from Great Freedom, a soulful portrait of gay resistance and romance in post-war Germany. Opens Friday at Film Forum. A movie release, MUBI.com. New on The Experiment. Across the country, people are transforming what it means to work. And this isn't the first time. Back in the 1980s, Minnesota meatpackers began one of the longest and most bitter labor strikes in American history, redefining how many of us think about labor. SPAM, How the American Dream Got Canned, is a 3-part series about food, work, and family on The Experiment. From the Atlantic and WNYC studios. Listen wherever you get podcasts.
With the BBC World Service and live from London, this is NewsHour with me, Tim Franks. Throughout our coverage and the build-up to this war, we've tried to hear from what we in the business condescendingly call ordinary people, as well as politicians and officials and military types, members of the public, in other words, because they are enmeshed in all this as well. Valentina Buchenko is one of them. She's 19 years old, a student at King's College London, but she went back to her home city of Kiev 3 weeks ago. Why?
I think it would be good here to give some context. Yesterday, I was walking through the Maidan, and the Maidan Square, which is, in the center of Kiev, and it was beautiful weather. I had coffee with one of my really close friends. I was living a kind of very basic, everyday life in my home city, and this morning, I woke up to the sound of an explosion. I've been in my house all day locked up. We've had to tape up our windows and to ensure that if an explosion happens nearby, that glass doesn't fly everywhere. I've had to go into the city a few times to pick up, some friends who have been near explosions and were in serious danger, or who were really fearing they had nowhere to hide. They had no bunkers close by to them because air signs were going off, so I now have some people staying in my house. hardened by war since 2014. Ukraine has been defending its land since 2014, and you know what? Well prior to 2014, there is something Ukraine has that Russia doesn't, and what that is, it's unity and patriotism, and we care. We very, very firmly care, and we will do anything for our country. Every single person in this country, including me, is entirely committed to protecting it.
Protecting it how? A type of long-term resistance and insurgency? That's what it's called for? And you'd be prepared to be a part of that?
Yes, I would be. I would be prepared to do, as much and anything I can.
What does your family think about the fact that you've come back, that this is where your immediate future lies? Again, to be blunt, that you're putting yourself in peril. You had another option. You studied in London. What do they think about the decision you've made?
My family also cares